give a rock star welcome to David Hern.
So today, I present to you what I'm calling the unsold story, why many sellers never find buyers. So to start, what I want to do is share, and maybe you know someone yourself or someone you know is a lot like me. This slide is completely me, whether I'm going on any kind of trip. I procrastinate like crazy when it comes to packing. I hate doing it. Doesn't matter if it's a personal trip, like an EO forum, doesn't matter if it's a business trip. I do the same thing every time. I procrastinate till the very last minute, and I look like this in my closet, shoving stuff in a bag, hoping I had enough for when I get there. My wife, on the other hand, she has made a list days in advance. She has generally always started with at least one business day ahead of the trip, starting to pack, getting things out, laying them together. And every time we open our bags, she seems to fit more at a much more organized manner than sadly I do. Half the time I'm begging her to help me. And so the typical scene is usually, I don't even start to think about this until my son starts screaming, "Dad, it's time to go." And that's about when I'm like, okay, I really got to move. Or if it's a business trip, maybe I don't have them to really push me, and so Waze starts dinging, saying, "Hey, if you want to get to Hartsfield, you got to go," because I live up in Swanee. So it's a hot second to get down there. And unfortunately, this is how too many businesses approach sell-side mergers and acquisitions and exit planning. They tend to approach it the way that I approach packing. And so my question today to start this is, might there have been a better way for me to exit the house? Might there be a better way for us to get to that next destination, whether that destination is retirement or the next chapter or the next trip? But first, I want to start with a few statistics to share. And these come from the Exit Planning Institute and the Exit Planning Exchange. 80 to 90% of a business owner's wealth lay locked, tied to their business. 80 to 90%. It's a massive amount on their personal financial statement. And this has, to me, significant potential impact for not just that owner, but for others. And when you look at that statistic combined with the next one, which is, I want to ask the crowd, what do you think the number one exit pathway is for businesses? That literally 80%, 8 out of 10 of this room, this is the pathway that they will ultimately choose when it comes to sell-side M&A. Any guesses? Sorry?
Close the doors.
Close the doors. Stole my thunder. Love it. I call it attrition. What does attrition look like? It's exactly what you said. You start like this for many, many years, right? And some of you may not have this type of company where you've got the LED sign or the sign on the front door, right? But you're open for business. And sadly, I just contacted you one day and it's this. And usually, I'll get a bounce back. And then you go, uh-oh, what happened, right? I need to check LinkedIn. Or maybe at best, I'll get a sweet autoresponder that maybe ChatGPT wrote for you that says, hey, after X amount of years, I've done it. My financial planner said I'm good. I'm on to that next chapter, whatever that chapter is, retirement or otherwise, right? And I want you to think about the point of view of that customer, those employees, those vendors. Where do we go? What do we do from here? And if those statistics aren't bad from an external lens standpoint, thinking of selling externally to some third party, sadly, the statistics aren't any better internally. So thinking about transitioning inside your firm to employees or your family, what I would call more of a succession orient instead of an exit orient. The number of businesses that go from Gen 1 to Gen 2, only 30% survive one generation later. And then of those companies that made it to Gen 2, that make it to Gen 3, only 10%. So if you cross multiply 30% and 10%, you get that there's about a 3% chance that your business, if you have an internal succession lens, that it will be passed down to your grandchildren, just 3% chance. And the biggest reason for this is a lack of exit planning, right? They're thinking about sell-side M&A the way I treat packing for my belongings. Wait till as long as humanly possible, rush out the door and see what happens, see what sticks. I still make it to the end destination. I always get to the airport, I still make it, right? But man, it's a lot of stress. I don't tend to always have the right belongings. I've got to spend precious time now to go get those belongings that I forgot to pack, and so forth. And so when I learned these statistics, it was at a time in my life where I was kind of at a low personally. I went through some major health outcomes that my forum knows all too well about, involving my heart. I had a near-death experience, and I had 2 heart surgeries after turning 30 years old. Talk about a birthday gift, right? And so for me, it became, learning these statistics became very personal, because after you go through an event like that, I can promise you the only thing you're thinking about on that table is impact. Was I a great father? Was I a great husband or spouse, right? And professionally for me, it was, okay, how do I make as much impact if I'm given a second opportunity, which thank God I was, right? And so for me, I felt a calling that I had to get away from the desk, stop hiding behind my big monitor and my spreadsheets, number crunching where I feel comfortable, and to get out there to try and have, yes, maybe I can't solve every business to help them transition and unlock that wealth, but I certainly can help a few and make some dent into these statistics that we're talking about. So if you're sitting there saying, well, why do I care? Like, who would buy my business? Why does this matter? Why should I care about, not being unsold, but rather being sold? And I would tell you the number one reason is the stakeholders. We have so many more stakeholders than just who's listed on your cap table as a shareholder, which is usually yourself. Maybe you extend it a little bit to your loved ones, your wife and your spouse and maybe your kids. But it's those employees counting on you day after day. It's those vendors and suppliers counting on you day after day. It's your community, right? The nonprofits that are counting on you to unlock that wealth. Because again, maybe your CFP, your financial planner, is telling you you don't need a single dollar to make it in retirement for all your goals that you have in retirement, right? So there's no pressure. But to me, there is pressure. Like, we've got to do better than that close sign when we're ready to transition. And so I'm going to share a few changes that we can make now that have massive impact later. The first is we've got to make, as an owner, valuation, what some people call sellable value, transferable value, enterprise value, the North Star KPI, key performance indicator, or if you're an OKR person, objective and key results. This should be the KPI that all your other metrics that you look at daily technically should be feeding into. If it's not moving, then there are things that are being left on the table. And unfortunately, we treat valuation like it's a once in a while scoreboard tool. We look at it maybe once every 5, 10 years, long cycles, and it's almost when we absolutely must do this. We're being told we're required to do it for the IRS or for some litigation we're going through, and we're missing a massive opportunity to use it as a strategic planning tool that we can measure more frequently, because all of us have some destination of where we want to get to in terms of size. It's all leading back to enterprise value, sellable value. And so we need to be using valuation on best-of-breed firms do this on an annual basis. So we say, okay, we're here at a certain million, we want to get to here. How do we get there, right? And ideally, you want to do this the day you start your business. But unfortunately, for most of us, by the time we awaken to these concepts, we're like, oh, well, that was, in my case, 6 years ago, right? Well, the old Chinese proverb, right? When's the best time to plant a tree? Yes, it was 20 years ago. Best time was probably the day you started your company. But the good news is, second best time is absolutely right now, right? So it's not too late. You may come to a time where you're finally ready to transition of some type, whether forced or voluntarily. But is your business going to be ready at that time, right? That's going to be the key question. And generally, we tend to spend our daily activities focused on what we see visible, what's hitting our profit and loss statement, what's hitting our balance sheet, which is really the tip of the iceberg. It's things that people can readily see from those KPIs. And we're ignoring massive potential of what's underneath that can have large impact on valuation, which usually gets to around risks, which you don't see just by looking at your financials or whatever HubSpot or whatever your systems are spitting out. They don't tend to spit out measures of risk. And the two that I'm going to share that are the two factors that have the tendency to depress your value as a company the most. The first is us, the owner. Generally, I think of the EOS framework. We are in too many boxes. We are doing too many things. The business is too reliant on us. And we usually rationalize it as who can better sell than the founder, right? Who has that better passion and so forth. But we're missing massive opportunity to delegate, which does have a cost. Yes, you'll see a P&L impact, but you'll see in turn a large impact on your enterprise value. The second, which is a very similar avatar, is more around the customer. This is where it's a diversification story, where you've got too many eggs in one basket, too much revenue tied to too few customers. Or it's around, okay, maybe you have plenty of quantity of clientele, so you don't see the diversification story, but it's the risk associated with that revenue from each customer, meaning maybe my revenue comes from transactional moments as opposed to steady, predictable, monthly recurring revenue, right? So usually it's one of those two shades of the story when it comes to the customer, either too much revenue tied to too few customers, or the revenue itself is perceived risky from the buyer's viewpoint. And my last point is around your team. It took a certain team that you built to get you to where you are now. It's going to take a different team to help you sell, not just to achieve the sale, so we're not one of the 80%, but sell at a valuation that you actually want and with the terms you really want. And my favorite quote around that story is that, one finger cannot lift a pebble, right? It takes more than one to pick up the rock. And you can't get started early enough to build this team. Maybe you already have a B2B advisor team, but maybe you have some components that you need to add to it, way ahead of the point of sale and transaction. And so I need to land the plane, so I'm going to end with a story here around Dr. Carol, who's a veterinarian that we had the pleasure of meeting about 5 years ago. And when we met her, all intents and purposes, she looked a lot like us. An EO type member who has beautiful P&L, cash flow on the surface. But when we went under the surface, we realized she's stressed out, she can't go on trips, she could barely do her forum retreats. And so on the rest of the world views something that seems successful, but the buyers get in and see all that risk that we're talking about below the surface, where she's doing too many things. And so we had the pleasure of working with her on 90-day sprints to start making changes in her business, because businesses are a lot like these tanker ships you see in the Savannah port, where they take a long time to turn and see the impact from these changes. And for her, we actually implemented EOS. So I see we had Brian Solka here, which is great. And starting to put people in other boxes beyond just Dr. Carol. And this led to massive value increase, where she actually ended up, she had a 10-year horizon that she wanted to sell, but a buyer came out of the woodwork from private equity, and she sold in 5 years at a favorable valuation. So to me, when I go to the gym, I used to think the heaviest weight was some bumper plate, some free weight, some big looking thing. But what I have found, it's literally the front door. If I open that door and go in, things just seem to just get easier. And it's the same on a treadmill. If you take that first step, each step just seems to get easier and easier. So my hope and prayer for you is that you'll take a first step. You'll open that front door, and that you'll start to try and embed a new KPI like valuation into your practice. Maybe it's taking a first step into adding to your B2B advisor team. In order to start making a dent on this, so you don't become the unsold story. So do you want to be sold? Do you want to be unsold? Thank you.